So, let me just begin. Are you trying to get my screen? Okay.
Mute, mute on your phone.
A day that should exist every day. But in that this is the official observance, I think it's appropriate that we're coming here together to talk about an issue of deep consequence because it threatens the humanity and the dignity of people. I also want to say that I look very much forward to a day where people do not have to relive and weaponize their trauma in order to compel action from their government. But for as long as that is the case, I'm grateful for people who are the closest to the pain. Because I do believe that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And so I'm glad that we are centering the experiences of families who've been impacted and individuals as well. Together we have a moral imperative to stand against injustice, and there is no greater injustice in our legal system than the death penalty. State-sanctioned murder is not justice. It is not a deterrent. It is not a solution. It is not healing. The death penalty is cruel, it is callous, and it only furthers the cycles of pain. We have a legacy in this country of treating trauma with more trauma. And we need to disrupt and change that legacy. Again, I believe those closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. So I thank you to everyone who has come to share their lived experience, especially those who bear a proximity to capital punishment because of how it has impacted your loved ones and even your own life. I truly long for the day when you do not have to relive your trauma again to compel your government to act. I do believe that we have momentum and we are closer to getting this done than ever before. Our calls for President Biden to take action began 4 years ago. I led a letter with my sister in service, Representative Cori Bush, to then President-elect Biden, urging him to halt all executions, commute the death sentences, and re-sentence folks, and to dismantle the death chamber that is Terre Haute. We cannot allow President Biden to leave the people on death row behind, people like Billy Allen, whose case was brought up during today's briefing, and the details make plain the flaws and dehumanization of the death penalty. We must abolish the death penalty. We must commute death sentences. We must save lives. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathleen Lucas, and I'm here representing Amnesty International, a global human rights movement with over 10 million people worldwide. It's appropriate that we're here on Human Rights Day. My role here is to serve as moderator for the panel, so I would like to introduce our panelists and also ask that you hold your questions to the end when we'll reserve some time for that. We're here today to honor the impacted individuals, to listen to the stories of the folks that are closest to the injustice. We also have some experts with us. We're here to say that President Biden must commute all federal death row sentences. We know that President-elect Trump has vowed to resume executions. I believe him. The only way to prevent another wave of state-sanctioned killings is for President Biden to take decisive action now and fulfill his 2020 campaign promise to end the death penalty. And we're here to also ask members of Congress to call on President Biden to commute all federal death sentences. I'd like to introduce the panelists. To my left, we have Rob Dunham. He's director of the Death Penalty Policy Project. We have Herman Lindsay. Herman is the executive director of Witness to Innocence and is also is it the chair of the Florida?
Yes.
Okay, he has many titles. Yeah, I'll let you tell them about that. And then Ms. Kane from the delegation of the European Union to the United States. She's a human rights policy officer. And then we'll hear from Billy through the magic of technology. And Billy Allen is currently on federal death row, and he'll be sharing some of his perspectives. And then next we'll have Ms. Brown. And Ms. Brown is the mother of Christopher Villalba. Ms. Brown witnessed the execution of her son by the federal government on September 24th, 2020. Next, we have Ms. Yvette Allen. Yvette is Billy Jerome Allen's sister and is the founder and the director of the Free Billy Allen campaign. And then we have Reverend Sharon Risher, who is the board chair of Death Penalty Action and the daughter of Ethel Lance, whose killer is a prisoner on federal death row in the wake of his racially motivated mass shooting at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. So let's start with you, Rob.
Hi, Kathleen, if you don't mind, let's actually start with Billy while he's on the line.
Let's start with Billy on the line.
We're going to have you go first because Congresswoman Presley is not able to stay the entire time. We want to be sure that she hears you. So I'm going to hold you up to the microphone and I want you to introduce yourself and then speak nice and loud, and everyone in here will be quiet so that you can be heard.
Congresswoman Diana Presley and her staff for bringing all of you together, assembling the panel of people here to speak, and allowing me the opportunity to be heard on this important subject at this congressional briefing. My name is Billy Jerome Allen. I'm 47 years old, and I'm speaking from you inside a prison cell on federal death row, where I've spent the last 27 years of my life convicted and sentenced to death for a crime I didn't commit. There is evidence of my innocence, but not limited to the government's negative DNA results, where they tested both me and the victim's DNA against DNA that was found on evidence at the crime scene, and where their results would exclude both the victim and I as a source, leaving a long-standing question of who does the DNA belong to, and why have both the prosecutors and courts opposed all requests for further testing? What are they afraid to find out? Second, the government's gasoline results, where they tested my clothes for traces of gasoline in order to link me to the crime, and the getaway van that their forensic experts said was not only soaked throughout gasoline before the crime, but would have left gasoline on the clothing of those inside. Their results would come back negative against me as well. Lastly, there's a transcript showing that a security guard came forward and informed the FBI that when he went to a shopping mall to pick up his paycheck, he saw me at the mall at the time the crime took place, talking to people with bags from clothes that I purchased at Walmart. This was an alibi that I immediately told officers about upon my arrest, and that they claimed they would look into. Yet despite this evidence being available at the time of trial, my trial attorney didn't look for, discover, or present it. And like all lawful convictions, where the appeal process is supposed to serve as a safety net against injustices, the courts have refused to acknowledge any of my evidence in order to uphold an unjust conviction. Now, while my case might seem unique, I am in no way the only person impacted by the underlying issue of ineffective assistance of counsel, nor where the courts have shown less judicial scrutiny and time for relief or warranted. These are flaws that plague all capital cases and show why the system is broken and can't be fixed. But instead of me bending to the weight of my injustice or allowing my pain, anger, or frustration to defeat me, it has been the fuel I used in the campaign to prove my innocence and fight for my freedom, to ensure that when I do go free, I leave prison a better person than when I came in. For over 27 years, I've been confined to a small dark cell for 23 hours a day. Despite the limitations that prison has put on me and the obstacles in my way, I've been able to better myself mentally and physically, while also earning countless certificates, my GED, and putting together a solid business and life plan with the help and support of my friends, family, and campaign team to ensure that my transition back into society will be successful. The path of change and growth and rehabilitation, believe it or not, is also a path that many of the men on federal death row have taken as well, despite it not being reported. There are so many, including myself, who have been labeled the worst of the worst, and a future dangers to those in prison and society, who would have maintained good conduct in prison and bettered ourselves in ways that have made us better sons, better fathers, better brothers, and better friends to those in our lives. Examples that change and growth and rehabilitation are possible, even in the darkest situations. Yet, sadly for many of us, in the next few weeks, if President Biden doesn't do anything before leaving office, we will be executed. That is just the truth of our situation. Because President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to lift the federal moratorium and continue his execution killing spree that started before leaving office his first term, which resulted in the death of 13 people within 6 months. Some of these people were my friends, such as Brandon Bernard, Christopher Diallo, Corey Johnson, Orlando Hall, and even Dustin Higgs, who too had an innocence claim of his own. I don't want to die, and with evidence to support my innocence, it's clear that I do not only not deserve to die, but that because of this evidence, I deserve to receive a full pardon because it's the right thing to do. And while I'm not speaking for anyone, I can say that many of the men on federal death row should have their sentences commuted because they've shown, not through their words, but through their actions and their clear disciplinary records, that they have changed for the best and deserve to live. As an innocent man, with evidence of my innocence, I'm making this personal plea to all of the lawmakers and all of you in the room who have the ability to make a difference, to help me in order to show President Biden that I deserve a pardon, and in doing so, doesn't show that he's soft on crime, but that instead demonstrates that he's harder on injustices when he's confronted with them. A decision that the American people would understand and support, and that President Biden community the sentences of all those on federal death row helps preserve our humanity, our dignity, and shows that we actually value all human lives, no matter who or where we are. And I thank you all for this opportunity, and I hope you all join us in this push.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Presley. We really appreciate your leadership on this issue. I'm going to turn this over to Rob Dunham, who is the head of the Death Penalty Policy Project.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Congressman Presley, for the opportunity to participate in this briefing today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Dunham. I'm the director of the Death Penalty Policy Project and former executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center. Before that, for 30 years, I represented people on Pennsylvania's death row. I've been given the impossible task of explaining in 6 minutes that the federal death penalty is irretrievably broken and that the sentences of the 40 men on federal death row were arbitrarily, discriminatorily, and unfairly imposed as a result of numerous systemic failures. Well, the impossibility of that task, however, underscores the importance of what we're asking President Biden to do, and that is to commute the sentences of everyone who is on federal death row. Let me just touch on a few of the issues that then candidate Joe Biden was led to correctly assert that we cannot ensure that we get the death penalty cases right every time. One reason the federal death penalty cannot ensure that we get cases right is because, just like state death penalty systems, it is marred by geographic arbitrariness and racial bias. Who gets capitally prosecuted depends less on the nature of the crime of which they are accused of committing than on where it occurred. Just 3 states, Texas, Missouri, and Virginia, account for 45% of all of the federal death sentences that have been imposed since federal death penalty came back in the 1980s, and 43% of the current federal death sentences. Those 3 states alone also account for 63% of all the federal executions and half of all the state executions in this country in the past 50 years. And the sentences imposed in these heavy-use states are grossly racially disproportionate. 75% of the federal death sentences in Texas, and all of them in Virginia and in the Eastern District of Missouri, which includes Ferguson and St. Louis, have been imposed on defendants of color. And overall, 58% of the death sentences imposed in the federal system have been directed at defendants of color, including cases in which black men were condemned by all white juries. Defendants of color also comprise the majority of the federal executions. Moreover, well, we back up. Justice should be consistent nationwide. It should not be geographically arbitrary, and it should not be racially discriminatory based upon where a crime occurs. And if you think that half of all of the federal eligible murders occur in these 3 states, you're not living in the same country that the rest of us are. Moreover, despite the false perception that the federal death penalty is reserved for crimes such as terrorism, that is very rarely the case. Instead, it is disproportionately imposed on the most vulnerable defendants. Looking at federal death row as it stood at the time of the start of the Trump administration's execution spree in 2020, we found that more than 85% of those men and women facing federal execution had at least one serious impairment that significantly reduces their culpability, and 63% of them had 2 or more. Approximately 3/4 of federal death row prisoners have documented histories of childhood trauma and abuse. About half exhibit signs of severe mental illness. At least 29% have developmental brain damage, traumatic brain injury, and/or intellectual disability. Nearly 1/4 were aged 21 or younger at the time of the offense, and 2/3 of these late adolescents were African American. Furthermore, the death penalty does not deter crime. It does not make the public or police safer. Instead, what it does is it risks executing innocent people. Finally, the federal death penalty has a legacy of wrongful executions carried out by the prior administration during the most notorious civilian execution spree in American history. 13 federal executions, more in 6 months and 1 week than in any calendar year since Grover Cleveland was president in 1896. To allow these executions to occur, the United States Supreme Court lifted every stay of execution and vacated every injunction that lower courts had issued in attempts to review and resolve critical issues in these cases. Joe Biden is a kind and compassionate man. He has an historic opportunity to advance the cause of human dignity and basic decency, to set an example for this nation and for the world by commuting federal death row. What a message commutation would send in support of Pope Francis's celebration of 2025 as a Vatican Jubilee year of reconciliation and forgiveness. Commutation is an act of grace. It's a merciful thing to do. 40 lives unquestionably are on the line. There is no guarantee that the current court will enforce or the incoming administration will respect their human rights and their constitutional rights. So at this critical moment in history, commutation is the right, the just, and the only thing to do.
Thank you, Barbara, appreciate that. Next, we have Mr. Herman Lindsay.
First of all, still going. Hello, everybody hear me? Okay. You have to forgive me because hearing Billy, I don't usually get emotional when I'm speaking. I put a protective mechanism in there to help me. But hearing Billy really affected me. My name is Herman Lindsay. I'm Florida's 23rd death row exoneree. I was exonerated back in 2009. Now I'm the executive director of Witness to Innocence, which is an organization based of death row exonerees from around the world. I'm also co-chair of Florida Asians for Attorney for the Death Penalty. As I say, this is emotional for me because hearing Billy call is just like I used to call her. You know, it's just like the 200 people that's been exonerated in the state, in the United States, been calling out, asking for help, trying to spare our lives. And it seems like the ones with power don't pay attention. They don't listen. Can you imagine how you feel about to take your life for something you didn't do, and you asking for help and there's nobody listening? People fighting in the courts for you and the judges doing what they want to do because they got the power to make decisions. They go home. The politicians, they don't like to fight. And I thank you, Ms. Presley, for standing up and fighting. That means a lot because when we on death row, we don't think nobody care. But seeing this actions here, we know that it is people out there that do care about us because they put us away like we're the worst of the worst when we're just simple people. We need to bring humanity back, and that's the only way, bringing humanity back into this system. That's the only way we're going to end up fixing it. Because when you leave it barbaric, there's no way of fixing it. Because when you leave it barbaric, you don't care about the judgment, you care about your career. You can, think about it. When the state attorney made me a victim of miscarriage of justice, only thing they was concerned about is their conviction and how prosecutors get promotions and more convictions. That's only come down. President Biden has an opportunity now to make the system somewhat right. At least stop it now and let us fight. Give us people that's trying to fight a chance to fight to make it right. And as long as it's on hold, we got a chance to get into people's ears to realize that this system is not the system. And the thing about it is, I fight, and I put myself out there to speak because I realize a lot of people really don't know what's going on. They for the death penalty and don't even understand the process. Don't even understand the damages is. You know, regardless of the innocent, let's talk about the ones that's guilty. How can we ask God to forgive us if we can't forgive others? People ask me, you're not bitter about what happened? No, I thank God for what happened because I can be out the voice to let the people know. And I fight. But I don't fight just for the innocent, I fight for the guilty too. Because I believe one thing, God gave us two things in this world. He gave us life, and he gave us a time to pass. How can you take a time to pass and use it as a punishment? Do I want to die? I could be sick right now and I'm dying. Do I want to feel like I'm being punished? And that's what the death penalty does. It does not scare anyone. It does not stop any crime. Look at all the mass shootings that's happening in this world and the gruesome crimes. What happens when that person is faced to get apprehended? They either kill themselves or they make the police kill them. So how can they fear death? How can they fear the death penalty? They don't. They welcome death because death relieved them from the consequences of facing justice. It also cheat the victim. It also cheat the victim, putting people to death. Because if he was sent out for a sentence, then you have to think about the consequences. If a person have cancer and they're in pain, when they pass away, we say they're gone to a better place. They don't have to worry about no pain. But when you execute someone, that relieves them from the pain, the thinking about it, the ability to rehabilitate, because that's what makes us rehabilitate pain. When something bad happens, it's like, it's not for us to go into depression, but it's for us to look at. Because if we didn't have bad things, we wouldn't learn. And right now, I need to learn. I need to learn that it is okay to commute this sentence and don't understand that you can't please a certain part of people, but be a leader for all the people. Thank you.
Stop and take a photo. It's for someone to press.
Pause for a photo.
Okay, panelists, we just want you all to have a photo with the Congresswoman Presley.
I'll sit in there. Just a minute.
Can you push this back? Thank you so much.
Sharon, push your water aside.
No, no, no. Just
And move that coffee cup off. Sorry, folks. We'll be right back with the program in a minute.
Next, we have Ms. Applegate.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the Congresswoman's staff for inviting me to this briefing, and thank you to the Congresswoman for her leadership on this issue. The EU is very grateful that you were the first Congress rep, I believe, to introduce a bill to abolish the federal death penalty, if I'm recalling correctly. Is that right?
I'll take it. But thank you for thanking my staff. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you for that.
But we're grateful for your leadership nonetheless on this issue. I was asked to participate to give the international community's perspective on the death penalty, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. The European Union and its 27 member states see the death penalty as a human rights issue. And I think the Congresswoman summed it up perfectly in saying that it threatens the humanity and dignity of people. And I think that that's all that needs to be said about that. At the EU, we take it so seriously that we have built it into our laws that current member states, we have 27 member states, and future member states cannot have capital punishment. So that's how seriously we take it, and as a result, it's one of our biggest priorities in our foreign policy. When different European countries got rid of the death penalty. It wasn't always the easiest thing to do. I've heard from some of my colleagues that there was some public opposition. Depending on different countries, there was concerns about rising crime. There was concerns about lack of accountability. And despite all these concerns, even though it wasn't the easiest thing to do for some countries, it was always the right thing to do. And I think that's something just to take away from that experience is that there are different challenges with, ending the death penalty once and for all, but it is the right thing to do, and we firmly believe that at the EU. In terms of what we do to advance abolition here in the US and in terms of our work globally as well, the first thing I'll mention is that we are very proud to have helped create the Alliance on Torture-Free Trade, which bans pharmaceuticals. Is this like really echoing? I'm sorry.
No, it's
Okay, make sure. Hear myself echoing. So we ban the use of European pharmaceuticals to be used in executions and other forms of torture. And I've heard from different advocates and different lawmakers in states throughout the US that our ban on drugs has helped slow down the rate of executions here. Of course, we see states finding other ways to carry out executions, but it's some states have just had difficulties getting drugs, and we're proud to have contributed to that, I would say. We also raised the death penalty to high-level officials. We've raised it to President Biden himself. We've also raised it to the State Department in our annual human rights consultations that we have every year, and the Department of Justice as well, and we continue to plan to do so. We intervene in individual cases. Of course, we always double check with the attorneys for the person that's scheduled to be executed to ensure that an intervention from us will be helpful because we never want to cause any harm. But if it is helpful, we send a letter from the ambassador of the European Union to the US to a governor, a parole board, an attorney general, whoever is best placed to receive that letter, asking for a stay on an execution, depending on what circumstances the execution may be performed under, especially in cases of mental illness, intellectual disability, innocence claims, lots of the issues that Rob talked about. We will intervene if it's helpful. We also take trips to states throughout the US that continue to use the death penalty. We try to find states where there's a little bit of an opening where we can be helpful. So we were in Ohio in 2022, meeting with state legislators and advocating that they pass a bill to repeal their death penalty. We were in North Carolina in 2023, meeting with Governor Cooper's staff, encouraging him to commute North Carolina's death row before leaving office at the end of the year. So we really, welcome the opportunity to go to these different states and share the European experience of abolition and call for states to move towards ending the death penalty. We also give support to civil society organizations, including Witness to Innocence, so we're very proud of that. And we finally do, many different public diplomacy initiatives. Every October for Europe and World Day Against Death Penalty, we do a big event here in DC. I go out and talk to lots of different students and different groups about our work on the death penalty. So we're really just trying to get out there and again, share the European experience, but also help be a part of the conversation about the death penalty. So I'll stop there. The EU sincerely hopes that President Biden will commute federal death row, not only to prevent future executions from happening, but also to bolster U.S. leadership when it comes to democracy and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kane. And now we will hear from Ms. Lisa Brown.
Thank you, Representative Presley, for allowing me to be here today. This has been so emotional for me to have this opportunity. Your story is so moving. It's been cross from me to. I want to try to help you to understand what it's like to have a loved one murdered in front of your very eyes. It is a premeditated murder. I am the mother of Christopher Villalba. He was murdered by the government September 24th, 2020. He was the seventh of the 13 killed during Trump's administration. I am a mother, a veteran, and I'm a retired civil servant. I served 40 years with the federal government, and I'm an advocate for justice, seeking to address the practice that has no place in the society, and that is the federal death penalty. For many people, the death penalty is a debate about policy, law, and deterrence. But for me, it's deeply personal. My son is one of the 16 total that have been killed on federal death row. And I'm here to tell you that what was executed that day was not just a man. It was my heart. It took 28 minutes for my son to die. And I sat there and watched him suffocate to death. In those 28 minutes, I saw evidence of the effect of the drug before he lost consciousness. There is so much cruelty embedded in the system that brought us to this moment. This is not justice. This is state-sanctioned murder. And I say premeditated because my son knew when, where, and how he would die. My son's death certificate lists as matter of death, homicide. They are validating that they are committing murder when they execute. The innocent and exonerated are human beings who are wrongfully condemned to die in a system that is meant to uphold justice. Yet we let this system persist and risk irreversible mistakes. But the flaws don't end with wrongful conviction. Even when the system functions as intended, the cost is staggering, both in financial terms and in moral weight. My son spent 20 years on death row before his execution. Let me share with you the true price of that punishment. That cost me my government career, my marriage, and a relationship with my only remaining child for many years. As a society, we must ask ourselves an essential question. If violence is the answer to ending violence, wouldn't we already have a safe society? The death penalty doesn't prevent crime, it perpetuates it. The cycle of pain and vengeance and loss. As a mother, I understand the pain of loss, but I also understand that taking another life doesn't prevent crime. It just deepens the wound where that pain lies. I know this because I've been on both sides of the courtroom. My daughter, Audrey Prosper, was almost murdered by her husband. She spent 6 weeks in a coma after he set her on fire. She was burned over 80% of her body and barely survived. I wouldn't have wanted him to get the death penalty for what he had done. And the reason for that is because he has 2 children, my 2 grandsons. Could you imagine me sitting outside the death chamber, witnessing with my 2 grandsons the murder of his father? There's no healing in that experience. Beyond the moral and systemic flaws, it is deeply troubling that the companies supplying lethal drugs for executions are profiting while they're concealing their involvement. Today, I ask you to look beyond the rhetoric and examine the facts. A system that is this costly, this flawed, and this inhumane cannot continue to exist. I urge you to imagine what we could do, what we could achieve by redirecting those resources into education, mental health programs, and community safety, instead of perpetuating a practice that fails at every level. As Mr. Dunham said, my son had meningitis at birth and had brain damage from the meningitis. And that played a large role in him ending up on death row. His crime was not just him. There were 5 other teenagers involved. They received different sentences. The only 2, my son and the 18-year-old, were the only ones old enough to face the death penalty. The others received smaller or shorter sentences, and there's only one that is still serving time. The others are already been released. They've served their time. But it's a cycle that extends through generations. This is something that will always be center of my family, and you'll never forget it. If you've ever witnessed an execution, you will never forget it. A lifetime, that's how long I'll live with the pain. I'm asking President Biden to do what he can do to stop this. He knows the pain of losing a child that he couldn't save, and save one that he could. Thank you.
Wow. Ms. Brown, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Now we have Ms. Yvette Allen, who's wrote to hear from at the beginning.
My name is Yvette Allen, and today I'm here as a sister, an advocate, and a voice for my brother Billy Allen and countless others who have been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death for crimes they didn't commit. I'll never forget the day my life changed forever. I was 16 years old, sitting in class when my principal came to get me. I'll never forget the day my life changed forever. I was 16 years old, sitting in class when my principal came to get me. They didn't say why. They just took me out of class and sent me home in the cab. As we drove through the streets of St. Louis, I stared out the window confused, wondering what could possibly be happening. And then the radio spoke the words that shattered my world. My brother, best friend, and protector had been convicted and sentenced to death. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. Bill isn't just my brother. He was my best friend, the one that walked me to school, carried my backpack when it was too heavy, introduced me to the world of art, and made me laugh even when things were hard. His absence has left a hole in our family that nothing or no one has been able to fill. Since that day, I've had to give up my own dreams, my future, all to fight for his life and freedom. I can't tell you how many nights I've stayed up wondering how we got here. I watched my mom, who used to be full of life, now bear the weight of her only son, not only being home, but facing death for a crime he didn't commit, praying for a miracle. What I can't understand is why innocence doesn't matter. The evidence is clear. My brother is innocent, but remains on federal death row. And now with only 40 days left before President Biden leaves office and Trump takes office and resumes execution as he's promised, time is running out to save his life. I feel the same anxiety today as I felt that day in the cab, wondering what is ahead. But this time I know the possibilities. I'm terrified this could be my brother's final days. I'm haunted by the thought that my last memories of him might be behind the glass window, unable to hug him or worth hearing his last words. And that's why I'm here, to urge you to join my family in asking President Biden to grant him a full pardon so he can finally come home where he belongs. My brother's story is a compelling case for why the other 39 men's sentences must be commuted. Our system is neither fair nor just. As Brian Stevens said, the death penalty is not about whether people deserve to die for crimes they didn't commit. The real question of capital punishment in this country is, do we deserve to kill? We must not give Trump the option to take my brother's life. It's time to bring him home and commute the role.
Thank you so much, Ms. Allen, for sharing with us. Next, we'll hear from Reverend Sharon Risher.
Thank you, Ms. Kathleen. Representative Presley, I want to start by thanking you, your staff, and everyone here in Congress who is working to help me end my pain and still get justice for my family. Again, I'm Reverend Sharon Risher. Currently, I chair the Board of Directors for Death Penalty Action, which is one of the largest grassroots advocacy group in the United States. I'm also a member of Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing, which is an organization that helps murder victim family members who oppose the death penalty. I'm a member of the North Carolina Coalition for the Alternative to the Death Penalty. And, excuse me, South Carolinians for the Alternative to the Death Penalty. I'm part of the South Carolina group because that's where I'm from. I was reared a Geechee girl from the low country of Charleston, South Carolina, the state where my mother was murdered. We stand united in our support of our collective efforts to end executions in the United States and in this world, which is important to note because today is International Human Rights Day. I'm just one person. And if I'm honest, I didn't want to be here. The only reason I'm here is because my mother, Ethel Lance, along with my two cousins, Susie Jackson and Tywanza Sanders, were among the victims of a man facing execution on federal death row. How I wish I didn't have to tell you my story. I will never forget that day in 2015 when I got a call that none of us ever want to get. I learned that my mother and my loved ones were gunned down by a white supremacist trying to start a race war while they were in Bible study on a hot June Wednesday night. It was another mass shooting, but you see, this one was different because this time there were Black people killed in a church. At this time, the motive was racism and hatred, which is how it became a federal crime, and while that murderer is on federal death row. Don't even get me started about how he got his guns and his ammunition, which also caused me to join Everytown for Gun Safety. And there's a lot of work to do with common sense gun laws also. Look, here's what we need to do, y'all. Dylan Roof wasn't innocent. He's not an innocent man on death row, but he's a man that has humanity, that I have been willing and worked hard to give forgiveness to. How do you forgive the killer of the person that killed your mother and your cousins in the most sacred place anybody can ever be. And that's in a church. We've been told as family members that we will feel better when this person is dead, but I'm here to tell you that's not true. The tragedy that happened to me will be in my heart and in my head until I take my last breath. But because of who I am and what I believe in, I do not want him to die. To spend the rest of his life in prison, yes. For him to suffer, yes. But not for him to die in the name of my family. I'm here to tell you that I believe in love and redemption and forgiveness and all of that. I'm a Christian pastor, but it's hard. I'm not going to lie. I want Dylan Roof dead. Not because of the state killing him. I want him dead so he can be off of this earth and I won't ever have to think about him again. But that's not the way it is. When I stood in front of the Supreme Court building and saw those words carved into the front of it, equal justice under law, I know that's an aspiration, but from this day, this country was founded and it's been alive, and we all know that. But I don't need to tell you that, because we all know we live in a broken and unfair and unfixable system, the death penalty. President-elect Donald Trump plans to execute all remaining prisoners on federal and military death row. He loves the death penalty, and that is why it is vital for President Biden to deny him that opportunity by commuting every death sentence remaining on federal and military death rows. If President Biden does not act, he is handling all of those people over to Trump for execution. And we know he's going to make it a dog and pony show. Y'all, we can't allow this to happen. We are urging you, President Biden. I hope you hear my words. I hope you get to hear the pain in my voice. I hope you commute all federal and military death sentences. And more than that, Biden, we need you to order the warden at the Terre Haute Death House. Take a bulldozer to that building and tear it down. Tear down the death house. That's why we say abolish, demolish the death penalty. Thank you. This is my mother, who would have been 80 years old this year, but she's lying in a grave, not for someone who was innocent, but someone who wanted to start a race war. We have to stop this, people. So people like my mom and everybody else on this panel that has somebody on death row or have died, we have to stop the death penalty. Thank you.
At this point, if members of the audience have questions, we'd be happy to take some of those.
Well, I would like to say, as the mother of Yusuf Salaam, that it is powerful hearing all the stories. And when I look at my son, I see that he is alive. But in the beginning, they wanted him dead too. And it was only through the grace of God that he is alive today and able to move forward and do various things to help the community. Your words touched me deeply. I feel it. And Reverend, I'm with you 100% because my son always talks about forgiveness. And when you wake up with all this stuff tied up inside your body, you have to forgive one day at a time. I know there are people who probably, like they've offered me therapy to help me so that I can move on. But it's hard to move on from a memory that's everlasting. Do you have any kind of words of wisdom that you could share with us here to help us know how we can move on?
There is never any moving on. When your mind and heart and soul has gone through such a tragedy, there is no moving on. There is learning to live with what you have. It's learning to live with the faith if you're a person of faith. But this, what you have been through, what I've been through, will forever be a part of my existence. So moving on, you can't ever move on, but you can live a better life.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address that question? No? Okay. Other questions?
Chair, you want to talk about the action opportunities?
Sorry.
She has a question over there.
Oh, no, I can wait, unless you want to talk about some action or opportunities.
Just people can call the White House and
Okay.
the action opportunities.
We are asking each and every person out here to call the White House. I don't have the number right in front of me, and that's kind of crazy too, but you could get the number. You could Google this.
It's on the other cards.
It's on the card?
And for those who are watching online, it's scrolling at the bottom of the
Okay,
screen.
I see it. Call the White House. 202-456-1111 or 202-456-1414. Let's flood the White House switchboard with calls from people who are compassionate about what it is we're talking about today. Commuting all of these death sentences, allowing these people to live, allowing these people hopefully to find a way of grace and forgiveness and redemption.
Thank you. So, ma'am, you had a question?
My question is more so for Ms. King, but it could be for anyone. For the EU specifically, you mentioned you all had some opposition to abolishing the death penalty. Could you address how you all work within the government and also with citizens that were maybe opposed? I know it's not going to be like 100% everyone, agreed, but what work did you all do that maybe members of Congress and other people who work in governments can do to bring some more people to the side to abolish it?
So I would say that I don't think.
Allie, can you repeat the question for the?
Sure. The question was what the experience in Europe has been in terms of the opposition towards abolishing the death penalty and how we went about addressing some of those concerns. I think the experience has been different for each member state, and they've abolished it at different times. You have some countries, for example, like Portugal, that haven't had an execution since 1849. So when they went ahead with abolishing it, there wasn't as much opposition. There's one country that comes to mind, and it's not an EU member state, but it is one of our European friends, so I'm going to just tell their story. When we were in North Carolina meeting with Governor Cooper's staff, my colleague from Norway, who again, not an EU member state, but one of our EFTA countries, shared Norway's experience in terms of the horrible terrorist attack that had happened in Norway. I'm sure many of you recall, I can't remember the year, but there was the individual who went to the youth camp and carry out a mass shooting. And my colleague was telling the governor's staff that, you know, during that time period, there was a lot of discussion in society about whether they should bring the death penalty back for this particular case. And the leader at the time said, okay, obviously this is a horrific situation, but we have to, now's the time where we have to lean into our values and lean into our morals and not bring this punishment back. Bringing this punishment back for this one person leaves that door open for lots of other cases to be tried in this way. And I think from what my Norwegian colleague has said, the leader at the time, you know, really speaking about the values and leaning into it was really effective for those that were kind of considering bringing back the death penalty. And as a result, Norway still does not have the death penalty. I would say overall, though, for us, I mean, we have not seen crime rates increase in Europe. We still have accountability and stringent accountability for crimes that are committed. And I think there's this overall feeling that the death penalty just has no place in modern society in the 21st century. So I hope that answers your question. It's hard for me to like one specific experience because that's Norwegian, just because each country has passed a different approach.
It does. I guess my question kind of is also like, how can we sway, not necessarily sway, but how can we message?
Yeah.
How important it is. I know things like this briefing, you know, helps, but how can we, like, if so I work for a member of Congress,
Yeah.
what are some messaging that we could do to, you know, be a proponent of this, or like even if for you all that do the work on the ground, how can we kind of help? Because my opinion, I think that America is kind of a punishment, very much punishment focused country. So how can we say like, hey, yes, someone committed a crime, but is this necessarily the correct punishment for that per se, without people having to come up and relive their trauma all the time?
For sure. Yes. One thing I'll just say, and I don't want to take up all the space here. One thing I would just say is that there's so many great groups. I'm not sure what state your members in. Ohio. So Ohio has OTSI, and I would say to look for those groups that are doing this work and can kind of advise you on what messaging would be best. I have found that just in our own advocacy, we really had to rely on the people that are on the ground, that are in their communities, to let us know what messages are best based on that particular state and what the concerns are of the people there. I think one thing that has been effective so far is the deterrence argument. We see in states that, I think the FBI puts out data every year that shows that the death penalty in states where it's still legal, the crime rates are higher. I'm sure Rob can talk a bit about that. I think the cost arguments are also very effective for Americans as well. I don't think a lot of people realize, and I don't think I myself noticed this until I started working on these issues for the EU, that it is wildly expensive to have a death penalty in place. And there has to be other alternatives that are more cost effective. You really want to kind of speak that plainly and in those ways. So I'm going to stop there and let the actual experts say something.
I would just like to, thank you so much. I would like to just say, I want to echo what you said. It's important to have the folks most directly impacted at the center of the conversation. That's so critical. The other thing I would say is, it's not so much that people support the death penalty, they don't even know we have it. When I speak with people in Pennsylvania where I live, most folks don't even know that we have a death penalty. It's because of the action that's been taken today that people are learning that we have a federal death penalty, that we have 40 people who will lose their lives. There are organizations that are focused exclusively on ending the death penalty. There are organizations that work on a broader issue of human rights. And I would say there's material on the table, and any one of us here would be delighted to speak with you. It's really up to Congress to call on the president to take action.
And I just wanted to say really quick also,
Okay.
and if Jack has heard Bill say something really quickly, I just want to speak to that, because we're pushing for Congress to see that there are also innocent people on death row. And I think that they're missing that, because I think that people typically think that everybody on federal death row is guilty. So we're pushing, we just want them to look at the evidence And even if there are guilty, we want to take a look at the census center. These crimes happened in the 90s. And a lot of people weren't fairly sentenced, and we want them to just take a look at those sentences, like somebody mentioned earlier, that federal was in place because of terrorist attacks. A lot of these crimes are not terrorist attacks. So yeah, for us, we definitely want you we have postcards as well, and we're calling for you all to just take some, hand them out. They have a list of evidence on the back of the cards, and we're just asking you to give them to Biden and Garland, who are the decision makers.
Yeah, Bill has a question, still on the line. Billy.
You can go ahead, Bill.
Okay, I mean, one of the things you pointed out, and I'm glad this came up about the people, the opposition against the federal death penalty or against the death penalty. Years ago, me and I got to talk a couple of years ago, and we were talking about this, this very day. And as I explained to her, years ago, I watched on C-SPAN a hearing done by Senator Leahy where he was trying to pass a bill to abolish the death penalty. Now, it was certain things that those who opposed this bill said. One of the things they said was that, they want to get closure for the victim's family. They felt like the victim's family deserved closure and things like that. Another thing was, they pointed out, especially for federal death row, despite, Senator Leahy presenting witnesses, who were on federal death row, who were exonerated, they said that, well, you can't point us to one case where somebody on federal death row was innocent, so therefore it's clear that the federal death penalty works, even if the state one doesn't work. I am that case they've been hearing all these years, and why they don't want to give me justice. Second, about, this claim that they want closure for the victim's family. Yes, some families believe that justice is done when you execute somebody, but at the same time, they're speaking through their emotions, through their pain, through their anger. Now, one example we have is Danny Lee's victims. Danny Lee's victims came forward before he was about to be executed and told President Trump, do not kill this man because that's not what we want. But what did he do? He moved forward because that's what he wanted, not what the victim's family wanted. And then another statistic that somebody just pointed out, and I've researched this for a long time because I wanted to understand the eye for an eye mentality. And if we look at the eye for an eye mentality, that's used by gang members. That's used by countries that we call brutal and things like that. And what happens in those countries? Violence and more violence. Now, when you look at the countries that don't have the death penalty, all those countries' education systems are better, their crime rates are low. And as was pointed out, in this country, for the states that don't have the death penalty, their crime rates are low and their educations are a lot better. Because in those countries, we're not teaching people that life doesn't matter. We're teaching them that life does matter. So I think that educating people on the differences between the countries and the states that have the death penalty and those that don't will get a better understanding that you can't reinforce crime and punishment by, putting crime and punishment against, people in return. It just doesn't work.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we had one more question over here.
She had a question on the amendment.
Oh, I think it was answered, but I wanted to hear from Rob. You mentioned very briefly about the safety of communities, and I was curious if you could share the data.
Yeah, the Death Penalty Policy Project just published a study last month looking at 33 years of FBI data on homicide rates and FBI data on the killings of police officers. And the theory is that look, you don't win an argument about the death penalty just because the facts are on your side, right? It's about emotion, and so we've got to tell stories. But the other side's stories are myths and sometimes lies. And so the facts are very important to take those stories apart. And so we looked at it because if the death penalty does lower crime rates, that's a reason to have it. And if it makes police officers safer, that's a reason to have it in that limited group of cases. What we found is, after 33 years worth of data, and after 1,600 executions in the United States, that the public is safer in states that don't have the death penalty than in states that do. And it's not just the average. It is when you list the states in order, you will find the safest states are ones that have either abolished the death penalty long ago or have abolished it recently. It's even more so the case when it comes to police officers. Police officers are actually safest in states that have most recently abolished the death penalty. Now, look, we're not stupid, right? There's no reason to believe that getting rid of the death penalty made police safer. What it tells us is that police killings have an effect on the legislative process. The prosecutors and the police unions will argue, and they will put up all the evidence, all the very emotional and all of the graphic evidence to try to say you need to have a death penalty because of this. When police killings are low, and they're low as a percentage of murders in the state, then legislatures have to look at the death penalty on the merits, and it loses. It loses because we know what the impact is on families. We know it doesn't serve victims' families. It re-victimizes them every step along the way for decades. And then if an execution does occur, that's when you realize, oh my goodness, this didn't help. The death penalty does not serve victims' families. What we realize is that all of the stories that the proponents of the death penalty tell have no factual basis. And then our stories, the truth of what the death penalty is, the truth of what the death penalty does, the truth that it doesn't work and it costs too much and it re-victimizes everybody, that's when we have a chance to win.
Thank you. I'm getting the cut it off signal. I don't think any of us are leaving, so please, if you have questions, don't leave, come and talk to us. Amanda, can you wave to the nice people? Amanda is with the Amnesty International. She'll be happy to answer questions. Abe Bonowitz, Death Penalty Action, and I think the rest of us are staying, so thank you so much. And again, what we're asking is for all members of Congress to contact President Biden and ask him to act now to commute federal death row. Thank you, everyone.